Yeah, but one thing that's really interesting that I find, that I've noticed is that there was like a very well-funded free Tibet movement, especially in the 1990s. And so a lot
Yes.
of Westerners, Americans especially, have this very romanticized, almost Orientalist idea of Tibet and the Dalai Lama. Like they think that Tibet is this place that is, you know, just
Shangri-La.
Shangri-La,
and Shang
basically. And then the Dalai Lama does speaking tours, and because of that, they also have a really romanticized perception of what Buddhism is. Like it's really like nonviolent, very peaceful. But I don't know, maybe could you talk a little bit about like more about that economic system that existed at that time before the communists took over? Because it was a really brutal system of, feudal theocracy, right?
Yeah, I mean, for Westerners, maybe the closest analogy would be medieval Europe,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you have a theocracy, ruled by bishops. Here you have ruled by clergies. Except, I mean, under a serf system, there's you know, the people who are serfs, they are not that much different from like chattel slavery, because the owners of the serfs, the masters, they can punish their serfs by any way they see fit. I mean, they don't have to go to a court to punish a serf for transgression.
Mm-hmm.
They are entitled to cut off their arms and legs.
Yeah.
The amputation is actually part of the punishment for the serfs. And so I so there's a book called, I believe it's called the struggle for modern Tibet. It was autobiography by a Tibetan. It was translated by I think Melvin Goldstein. And it's very interesting because he was as he started as a young, he's from a lower ranking member of the society, right? And he joined the clergy, but what happened was, he witnessed firsthand how the high ranking monks just use them uh, and abuse them many ways. I think he himself talked about he was sexually abused by
Yeah.
by the senior monks.
What?
And and he became good friend with Dalai Lama's older brother. And Dalai Lama's older brother have to he he was quoted of being saying, there are two type of people in Tibet. There are one who eats zamba. Zamba is a traditional is a staple Tibetan food with a barley mixed with yak butter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. So he said there are type of people in Tibet. There's one who eats zamba and there's one who eats shit, right? And that's Dalai Lama's brother, talking about basically the kind of class divide in Tibet. And that was kind of a very pervasive attitude among the upper class aristocratic families, because the serfs for them are just beasts of burden,
Mm-hmm.
animals that they're not seen as fully humans. That's why they're allowed to use them however they like. But I do recommend that book, The Struggle for Modern Tibet, because it's written from a perspective of a Tibetan man who, you know, joined the monastery at the bottom and he tried to work his way up through the bureaucracy, but then at every point he was being put down because his birth, because his because they judge him by where he come from, his family ranking, because who you are, which family you're born to, that's all very important. And then eventually he decided to go back to Tibet to join the revolution because he saw what the communists was doing was genuinely modernizing Tibet, which is what he wanted to do. So he went back and eventually he became an English teacher in Tibet, and he actually, I don't know if he's still alive. He may pass away recently, or he may still be alive. But his name is Tashi Tsering, and I think the book is called The Struggle for Modern Tibet. It's in English, so it's very available. I highly recommend people seek it out, and he really talks about kind of the struggle for modernizing Tibet from an insider's perspective.
Yeah, Michael Parenti writes a little bit about Tibet too, and he talks a lot about this kind of abuse that was really common in Tibetan society. As you mentioned, just like torture and like cutting off limbs as punishment. And then I think Buddhism, it doesn't allow you to kill anybody. So a lot of the times, a lot of the serfs, they were punished by being really brutally tortured or beaten, and then they just be left out in a field to die. And then he also talks about this usury system that was going on at the time. Like serfs were taxed for everything, getting married, the birth of each child, the death of every family member, planting a tree in their yard, keeping animals. There was like a tax for religious festivals and public dancing and drumming. Those who couldn't work were taxed for being unemployed. If they traveled to another village for work, they had to pay a travel tax. So this was like another one of those things, this, usury system that was abolished once the Chinese took over. And it's really interesting the way that we conceive of it here, because when we talk about it, we like think of it as colonization or colonialism. But we don't ever really get, this alternative picture of this brutal economic system that was going on at the time, and, the good things that Chinese did, because they came in, they built hospitals and schools, infrastructure for running water and electricity.
I took umbrage to that description of colonialism because it's kind of personal, because my parents work in the Tibetan region for 15. My mom worked for 15 years. My dad worked for 10 years.
Oh yeah, you did. You lived there when you were really young, right?
I was conceived on the Tibetan plateau. I didn't live there because my parents, they decided that that I'm I can get better schooling and healthcare in my mom's hometown. So my mom actually went back to her hometown Chongqing to give birth to me. But before that, I was conceived on the Tibetan plateau at my parents' workplace. And my parents, my mom went to the Tibet. They didn't go to the central Tibet. They went to the Tibetan area of Sichuan, which is still on the Tibetan plateau. And my mom went as a 20-year-old nursing student who just got out of nursing school. And my dad got sent. This was during Cultural Revolution, so it's around 1968. My dad, right after him graduating from college from Xi'an Jiaotong University, and it was funny. There's some funny stories. He went to. So my dad got sent there, and first of all, like at the time, not many Han Chinese people want to go to Tibet. Okay, so
Yeah.
so they were sent there. My dad, in fact, he originally was assigned to go to another countryside in Sichuan, but his classmate, who didn't want to be assigned to the Tibetan region, who didn't want to go to Tibetan plateau, worked his connection and then took his spot. So then my dad ended up going to the Tibetan region. And when my dad arrived in 1968, the local party secretary asked him, "Oh, what is your they were very excited to receive a college grad, because that's a college grad was very rarity in China in 1968, and not to mention in like a very far remote Tibetan region. And they were excited. So what's your major? What do you do? He said, oh, I'm electrical engineering. I'm majoring in double E. And the party secretary heard engineering, and he was like, okay, we need to build roads. We could use engineers. So, and it's only a few years later when they finally decide they need to build those small hydroelectric power plants to provide electricity. And that's when they remember, that guy, that college grad, he said something about electrical. And then finally my dad got to do something that's related to his major. So he actually built a series of these small hydroelectric power plants to power electricity in the countryside, in the Tibetan countryside. And my mom was sent with a group of other nursing students to Tibet, to Tibetan region. They were located in high altitude pastures. So as I mentioned, in Tibet, there's like low-lying valleys where the towns are located. But a lot of the nomads, they would drive their herds to up the mountains to graze. So to service the herdsmen, they set up a high altitude clinic like on the high altitude pasture. Now my mom told me all like, when they went, there was no running water. There was no, forget about hot water. There's no running water, no electricity. Yeah. There's no heat, and it was just a shack. It's just a wooden shack in this very high plateau. And so somehow they made to do, and to just to get to the town, they need to ride a horse for half a day to go down the mountains. But she did provide. They were able to provide medical service to the locals, and there are a lot of stories she told me. So when my mom went, there were cultural clashes for sure. Because when my mom went in 1968, the insurgency was still going on, because as a matter of fact, the Tibetan insurgency went on from 1959 till 1972, till Nixon visit to China, because the CIA was running a training camp, a base out of Mustang, Nepal, where the Tibetan guerrillas will be gathered, and then they will be flew in to Tibet, airdropped and supply. And my mom still remember in 1972 when the last batch of Tibetan rebels come down the mountains to surrender, to reconciliate with the government. But my mom went in 1968, because at the time the insurgency was still going on. They had to, even as nursing students, they have to go through like a month of military training with the PLA. But before their training could complete, the PLA unit they were assigned with had to be deployed elsewhere to respond to an insurgent attack. And one night, my mom, she was sleeping, and she heard a gunshot outside, and they all came out to see what's going on. So there was a Tibetan herdsman leading a couple women to the camp, and was arguing with so they were left with one PLA commander, right? The unit left, but there one PLA commander was left to watch over them. So at the time, they saw the Tibetan man arguing with the PLA commander, and it turns out that so the Tibetan dude find out there's a group of girls there, and so he came. He said, okay, like he was talking to the PLA commander. So like, you have a bunch of girls. I have a couple women. Let's trade. Let's trade. Like the PLA commander said no, so he thought the PLA commander was haggling with him. So it's like, okay, how about one of yours for two of mine? And then in the end, the PLA commander got fed up, and he pulled up a gun on fire, a warning shot in the air. So there was those kind of cultural clashes, and also there was a lot of hot springs in the areas, because there's a lot of geological activity. So there's a lot of hot springs, and And so because there's no electricity, there's no heating, so the people locals would just take bath in the hot spring. So my mom and her colleagues, co-workers are so excited they went to take a bath in the hot springs. But in Tibet, the men and women, they bathe together. It's not a big deal. It's not, segregated. So while they're bathing, and some Tibetan cowboy came with his yaks and was taking off his clothes, was jumping in, and my mom, they're like city girls from Chongqing, that like they're conservative, like in 1960, they're like, what are you doing? Don't come in. And so the Tibetan guy just look at these girls and laugh. He laughed at them, and he just laughed. and yeah, and one time my mom, well, he was so she was recruited actually to put up a show. They have these to put up a show for the locals, right? Like kind of hearts and mind. And so because my mom, she was pretty. She was recruited to put up a show. She was a lead in this like dance show or whatever. So after the show was over, some Tibetan locals told her, "Oh, you're great, man. That show was awesome, amazing. You're great. The rebels that came down from the mountain to see you last night. They really loved it." Yeah, so there were a lot of anecdotal stories. But so I reject the term colonialism because. First of all, my parents didn't want to be there. They rather be assigned to their hometowns. But
How
they
long were they
were.
there?
So my dad was there from 1968 to 1978.
A
Until,
long time.
yeah, because
Yeah.
1978 is when college, they allowed college admission again. They restarted the college entrance exam. So my dad then tested in for the master's program in Chongqing University in my mom's hometown. So he went back to study. But my mom was still stayed there until I think 1980s. Like she was there for 15 years. Like
Wow.
when I started second grade, my mom was still in the Tibetan region, and she only came back later. So I actually didn't spend much time growing up with my parents because my mom had to go back to work 3 months after gave birth to me. and
Mm.
and I didn't see my mom until I was 3 years old. I didn't know, like, my people telling me my mom come to see me. I'm like, what's mom? They're like, she gave birth to you. I'm like, no, my grandma gave birth to me. This is ridiculous. Because I didn't have the concept what a mom is. And but I did visit them. My grandma took them to visit them in the Tibetan region when I was 3 years old in 1979, and I remember it was at the time there's a couple of impressions. I remember the roads because all the roads are carved on the cliff. I mean, like if you peek from the bus window, you look down. There's like a
Hmm.
1,000 meter drop all the way down, and I can remember seeing the
That's
wreck.
so scary.
I
That's
remember seeing the wrecks of
terrifying.
trucks and buses on the very bottom. So that
Oh my
was very
God.
terrifying as a 3-year-old. And also, another thing was, I remember. So in Tibet, people say, well, what does it mean being autonomous, right? So autonomous means their customs and their customs are traditions are respected. So in most of China, in the most of Han China, you cannot carry open-edged weapons, right? You cannot go logging a long sword with open edge in the cities without being stopped. and But it's allowed in Tibet and the Tibetan regions because that's a local tradition. And it was local
Oh, okay.
tradition that man carries big knives, big swords. So I remember when I was 3 years old, we stopped by a tea shop. Um, and opposite of me is this massive Tibetan man with a big knife set down in front of me, and I got scared. I was 3 years old. I just start crying, but because I never seen that before. And but yeah, it's like in the yeah that's a thing in Tibet. Every man they had carry their big sword around, and then
Hmm.
that marks it different. Like they have different regulations from other parts of China. And I was so again, my mom, she was there to provide um, another thing about colonialism is the Han Chinese who went to Tibet, mostly they didn't go there to settle. Most of my mom and most of her co-workers, they all came back to their hometowns after cultural revolution ended.